Hey everybody, I hope you're all doing well today. It's your boy Cyclical here, back with another Naruto discussion video. I hope the title will have made this pretty obvious, but today I am going to be following up with what I said in my Pain versus the Sanin video and be talking about Itachi versus the Sanin. I don't think you really need to watch any of my other videos to keep up with what I'm going to be saying here, but if you want to be keeping up with this discussion in full, watching my Pain versus the Sanin, Sanin versus the 5 Kage, Itachi versus Pain, and Akatsuki ranking list videos all might be a little bit helpful. Once again, they are by no means necessary to watch to keep up with today's discussion, but I will be referencing things I have said in those videos. So without any further ado, let's get right into this discussion. Now, the first thing I want to clear up is that even though I'll be using sick Itachi who fought against Sasuke, Itachi is still absolutely capable of participating in a fight like this. I know I've said before that he isn't well suited to fighting groups of opponents, and this is true for the idea of Itachi fighting like an entire army at once, but a small group of opponents that are all weaker than him, Itachi should have the skill to handle, especially if it's only 3 opponents at once. Whether this means he can handle the Sanin, though, is what we're here to discuss today, but I just wanted to make it clear that at least in general, Itachi does have some tools at his disposal to make it possible to take on a group in a fight. I've also said before that Pain is much more straightforwardly powerful than Itachi is, and I still maintain that this is absolutely true. However, I also want to make it clear that overall might is not the only determining factor in a fight. I should hope that any of you who've seen my Itachi vs Pain video should know exactly what I'm talking about when I say this, since I claimed and still do believe that Itachi would beat Pain in a fight more likely than not. If you don't want to take this opinion of mine into account though, I can make an example of the Naruto vs Sasuke fight at the end of part 1. In this fight, I think it's abundantly clear that Naruto is stronger than Sasuke is. He's not dodging attacks, for example, and isn't fighting with any determination whatsoever for about the first third of the fight or so. On top of this, Sasuke does have things like his Sharingan to help him keep up with Naruto's superior strength and speed through portions of the fight. And this leads me up to the first major point I want to make about this matchup, that having good enough hacks should make it possible to win a fight even if it's heavily in favor of the other fighters. As this applies to Itachi, he has quite a few moves in his repertoire to quickly take out his opponents. And in a fight between Itachi and the Sanin, I think the various hacks of the participants in this fight is going to wind up being far more important than the overall strength of the fighters, meaning that the deciding factor in this fight is likely going to be if one side can outsmart the other and concoct a winning strategy. I'm not going to neglect scaling these characters though, and I'm actually going to start with a brief scaling section to make it clear where I believe these fighters stand relative to one another. Starting with the Sanin, I want to make it clear again that I think each of the Sanin is on the upper end of Kage level. Quickly going over why this is for each one, I think Tsunade was able to keep up with the other Kage in their fight against Madara and was clearly one of the key players at the time. Jiraiya was able to press Pain in a fight by himself, was respected by all of the nations, and if you take the databook statements into account, his strength in Sage mode was said to surpass the 5 great nations. I tend not to trust the statements from the data books much since they tend to make some rather hyperbolic statements, but if you do factor them into your scaling, that is pretty blatant. And then there's Orochimaru, who on top of being treated as a major threat by all 5 of the nations, was also able to kill 2 sitting Kage and is often thought to be the strongest of the Sanin. I don't want to get way too into depth here, but I do want to make it very clear that I think Itachi will be up against 3 high Kage level opponents. In fact, I said in my Sanin vs the 5 Kage video that I think the 5 Kage would lose to the Sanin, meaning that Itachi is in for a harder fight than what Madara had to go up against in the 4th war. On the other side of things, I do think that Itachi has a pretty clear edge over the Sanin, at least in terms of individual scaling. For starters, Itachi has been shown more than once making a complete joke out of Orochimaru, and I'll reiterate that Orochimaru is likely supposed to be the strongest of the Sanin, and Itachi has no-diffed him on at least 2 separate occasions. Itachi was also able to keep up with KCM Naruto and Killer Bee at the same time in a fight, and this is important because in Naruto's own words, he is way stronger than when he fought Pain. This would mean that Itachi is comfortably dealing with a Naruto who is stronger than he was in Sage Mode, and Sage Mode Naruto is likely stronger than all of the Sanin himself since Fukusaku claims that Naruto has surpassed Jiraiya, and Naruto was the one to defend Tsunade from Pain, etc., etc. Like I said, I want to keep this part of the video short, but I hope you all have the understanding that this is a fight between some incredibly high-level shinobi, with Itachi being overall stronger than his opponents, but at the same time being at a disadvantage due to being outnumbered. So from this point forward, I need to start laying out the various win conditions for each group and explain how the other side would be able to respond or even counter each option that one fighter can throw out. I'll start with Itachi this time, since he has a few less jutsu to go through than the entire arsenals of all three of the Sanin. The first thing I want to make clear about Itachi in this fight is that while he's probably a better taijutsu fighter than any of the three Sanin are, he's not going to be able to make this a win condition. Not only would this be one of the worst ways to deal with the Sanin, since Orochimaru and Tsunade can both either heal the damage or substitute out of it, but there's also the fact that if Itachi engages one of the Sanin in hand-to-hand combat, he'll quickly find himself being pressed by at least the other two, as well as any summons they might have out at that point. Of course, Itachi has incredible skill with taijutsu, as well as his Sharingan to give him even more of an edge, and he tends to also use shuriken in his taijutsu exchanges, which means that his physical striking power isn't really all that important here. But like I said, this isn't a win condition for Itachi by any means, since he's not only outnumbered, but he also has to deal with the fact that Tsunade definitely hits harder than he does, and so a good punch or two from Tsunade would probably take him down. In regard to taijutsu, I also don't think it's a win condition for the Sanin either, since Itachi should be fast enough to avoid pretty much any damage from a hand-to-hand scuffle. So in all, I think this fight is going to be much more dependent on the various hacks that each of the fighters have. The next thing I need to cover for Itachi is the Amaterasu. I do think this is a threat to the Sanin if they just sit around and let it hit them, but they obviously won't just try to tank it outright if they can help it. I don't think they'd be easily able to figure out that it's coming, but since Orochimaru can just substitute out of the flames, Tsunade can out-heal any damage she would take, and that at least Jiraiya and Orochimaru are both proficient enough with Fuin Jutsu to potentially seal away the black flames, it's reasonable that they could avoid the damage here. In my opinion, Jiraiya probably has the hardest time dealing with Amaterasu since he can't just shake it off, but I don't want to say it would be impossible for him to deal with. For example, he may be able to block it with some sort of earth style or summon the belly of the mountain toad to protect himself. Next, we have the Tsukiyomi, and to be fair, there is basically nothing the Sanin can do to resist this jutsu. If any of them get hit by it, they're going to have a full ride in Itachi's illusion, since the real-time duration of the jutsu is so short. I know that most of you are already aware of how quickly this jutsu runs its full effect, but for any of you who aren't, I'll just point out that in the fight between Itachi, Kakashi, Kurenai, and Asuma, Kakashi's allies only perceived him looking into Itachi's eyes and then immediately falling to his knees and screaming in pain. They didn't see him hold still or anything, it just kind of happened instantaneously. And in this instance, the Sanin wouldn't be able to just snap one another out of the effects of this jutsu like they might be able to do with some other type of genjutsu. This isn't to say that the Tsukiyomi would be all that Itachi needs to win this fight though, mostly because it does come with some pretty serious drawbacks. First and foremost, it has a huge chakra cost to Itachi, and on top of this, it seems to physically exhaust him and cause an immediate detriment to his vision as well. All of this seems to indicate that he probably couldn't use this more than once in a given fight, and even if he can use it more than one time, he probably can't use it in quick succession. Moving on to the final major facet of Itachi's skills, he's got his Susano, which has both the Yata Mirror and the Totsuke Blade. This is, once again, a very dangerous thing for the Sanin to have to deal with. The Susano on its own is durable enough to withstand things like the Giant Rasengan and the Kirin, even if you don't think that Itachi used the Yadomir to block the Kirin, and has enough attack power to rip off Nagato's arms when he's holding Bee and Naruto trying to steal their souls away. The Yadomir is stated to be indestructible and is shown to block even Orochimaru's 8-headed Hydra form, meaning that it can likely block almost anything the Sanin can throw out. If you are in the camp that thinks that the Yadomir was used to block the Kirin, this is by no means a downplay to its strength, since the Kirin blew up almost the entirety of the Uchiha hideout in the collateral of the attack, leaving Itachi more or less unhurt. Then lastly here, there's the Totsuka Blade, which can deliver some pretty devastating slashes and seal away anything that Itachi stabs with it. I will point out, though, that this seems to take at least a little bit of time, which could leave a potential opening for the Sanin to exploit if Itachi does attempt to seal anyone away. But obviously, they shouldn't be able to resist being sealed if one of them does get stuck with the blade. Lastly, Itachi has some miscellaneous aspects of his arsenal, like being obscenely good with shuriken, having some particularly strong fire style, and being able to pull a bunch of intricate genjutsu shenanigans in quick succession. These are all things that the Sanin should be able to deal with, though they will certainly help Itachi to survive a bit longer if he's being pressured. To sum Itachi up, I think he's got a large array of dangerous techniques that the Sanin would have a very hard time dealing with. Unlike Pain, these jutsu can be used more readily and less predictably, though none of them are a one-and-done win condition like the planetary devastation would be. Their lack of overwhelming power is offset by their ease of use, but they still carry a heavy stamina cost for Itachi, meaning that he can probably only use a handful of his Mangekyo jutsu before he's out of gas. Once again, I'm using sick Itachi here, so his stamina is much more of a factor in this fight than it would be if he were Edo Tensei or whatever. Moving on to the Sanin, I'll start with Tsunade since she'll be the quickest one to go over. Tsunade has a relatively simple moveset that is focused on hard-hitting taijutsu. Like I said earlier, a few good shots from her would probably put Itachi down, but he can likely avoid what she's throwing his way unless he gets worked into a corner by Tsunade's allies. Tsunade has some pretty major healing jutsu, though honestly I'm not sure how relevant it'll be in a fight against someone like Itachi, since much of this fight will be decided by who gets caught by whatever ridiculous one-shot ability is being thrown out by their opponent. This isn't to say that healing couldn't be useful at all in this matchup, but I don't think it's going to play a major part. This just leaves Tsunade's summoning beast Katsuyu to go over. I actually want to take a good minute to talk about Katsuyu real quick, since she has something that could be incredibly helpful against Itachi. That being her corrosive acid spit, which just might be the single best option the Sanin have for getting through Itachi's Susano. We've already seen that Mai's acid mist was capable of melting through Sasuke's Susano, and so I do think it's pretty much confirmed that Katsuyu's acid spit could do the same thing. Itachi's Susano isn't very mobile, at least not compared to how mobile Itachi himself is, and so it shouldn't be too hard for Katsuyu to hit Itachi with a huge shot of acid if he puts up the Susano. This would force him to either drop the jutsu or attempt to deal with having a huge hole in his defenses for at least a little while until he can get rid of Katsuyu and reform the jutsu. Moving on, we next get to talk about Jiraiya. I made a pretty big deal out of him in my last video about Pain versus the Sanin, and while I don't want to downplay Jiraiya in this match, I also don't want to spend quite as long on him, so I'll give the quick version of what he can do here. Jiraiya has the widest variety of animal summons through all of the Sage Toads, which he can use to push the numbers game much further in the Sanin's advantage, and on top of this, he could potentially summon Ma and Pa to help him get into Sage mode, which should help close the gap between him and Itachi's physical attributes. I still don't think that Sage Jiraiya would be quite as fast or as strong as Itachi is, but it would certainly make a difference here. Jiraiya is of course good at using ninjutsu, several of which Itachi would have to either dodge or block with the Yadomir. For instance, a solid hit from the Giant Rasengan would probably be catastrophic for Itachi. Then lastly for Jiraiya, I want to bring up the Frog Song Genjutsu. This is something that Itachi frankly could not resist. He wouldn't be able to see it coming, first of all, and even if he could notice the chakra building up in the frogs, he wouldn't know what sort of jutsu would be coming. The only real argument I can see for Itachi breaking free of this genjutsu would be that since Itachi is one of the best users of genjutsu in the series, he might be able to will himself out of it, but I honestly don't think that's a very strong argument. This just leaves Orochimaru to go over, and to be honest, his abilities are probably the worst suited to fight Itachi with. This is evidenced by the fact that he's been one-shot by Itachi 2 times, but I still think it would be a bit disingenuous to claim that Orochimaru would be a non-factor here. For starters, Orochimaru has his own summons just like the other two Sanin. He has the Sage Snakes, obviously, but he also has the most dangerous summoning jutsu in the entire series, the Edo Tensei, at his disposal. This jutsu allows him to bring back the dead to fight on his behalf, and Orochimaru has access to some pretty strong people to summon with this. I don't know if I want to allow usage of the first 2 Hokage or not, but even without these, he should be able to at least summon Rasa, who is himself Kage level since he was, of course, the Kazekage. Of course, Itachi is perhaps one of the best equipped people to deal with the Edo Tensei due to the ease with which he can seal the summons away using the Totsuka Blade, but at the very least, having these summons around can help add a bunch more pressure onto Itachi. The last thing I want to go over for Orochimaru is that he's very slippery. And when I say slippery, I mean he's probably one of the hardest people to kill in ninja history. He can constantly use the oral rebirth technique, which is the one where he crawls out of his own mouth like a snake shedding its skin, and each time he does this, it also seems to heal his wounds as well. He can partially transform his body into that of a snake to help him escape from holds and such, and he can also use the Rashomon gates to block large-scale attacks that come his way. So in summation for the Sanin, while I think that they are individually weaker than Itachi is, they have a huge advantage with how much they can add to their own numbers game through their various summons, and on top of this, they also have good enough hacks and attack power to make it so Itachi needs to be very careful not to get hit by anything, or he could quickly wind up dead. With a mix of summonings, ninjutsu, and even a healthy dose of potential sealing jutsu on their hands, the Sanin should be a pretty big threat to Itachi. So with all of that groundwork done, I can finally get into analyzing how a fight between them would go down. Intel is going to actually play a pretty major factor in this fight, since Jiraiya at least should have a good understanding of how Itachi's jutsu works, since Itachi has been Jiraiya's informant for the Akatsuki for a long while. Orochimaru's likely done some pretty in-depth research about Itachi and what he can do, and Tsunade would also have at least a surface-level understanding of what his jutsu are, since she's the Hokage and she gets all of the classified information about dangerous criminals and threats to the Hidden Leaf Village. Itachi should also know a good bit about the Sanin since they're not only super famous, but Itachi also has a tendency to do some pretty detailed research about anything and everything if he thinks it can help him reach his goals. With that said, I think when we take character into account, this will mean that there's going to be a very intense bout of strategy and counter-strategy at play. Itachi does know about Sage Jutsu, and he likely knows about the fact that Jiraiya can use it as well, due to the research he's probably done on the topic. And if that's the case, I think that the fight likely starts with Itachi targeting Jiraiya first in order to prevent him from entering Sage mode. This would provide ample opportunity for Orochimaru and Tsunade to start attacking any openings Itachi leaves, though, creating a situation in which at least 2 of the fighters are under a lot of pressure right off the bat. If Itachi decides to be cavalier about it and use one of his Mangekyo powers right away, he might be able to take whoever his first target is out of the fight, and this would obviously come at the cost of a lot of his chakra though, and would also leave a chance for the other 2 Sanin to either attack Itachi or summon their animal summons. If Itachi doesn't go in guns blazing, then it's also likely that the 3 Sanin would do their summonings right away, so either way, Itachi winds up in the hot seat pretty quickly. Now the fight becomes a matter of whether Itachi can deal with all of the heat coming his way, and to be honest, I don't think he can do this without the use of his Mangekyo Sharingan abilities. Namely, I think Itachi is going to need to use the Susano to protect himself from an onslaught of 3 Sanin, Katsuyu, Manda, and at least Gamabunta and probably more of the Sage Toads, and also potentially an Edo Tensei ninja or 2. With the amount of attack power that the Sanin side possesses, it would only be a matter of time before the Susano cracks, and even if you don't think that they can break through the Susano, there's no way that Itachi's going to win the stamina battle here, so he will need to swing back, and he will need to swing back hard. How he approaches this can vary, but I think one of the best options would be for him to use the Amaterasu, since it can affect multiple targets the easiest out of Itachi's arsenal. I've already mentioned how this could potentially be resisted though, and even if it takes a few of the summons out of the fight, I don't think it's possible that Itachi could get everyone with this jutsu. In particular, Orochimaru can probably substitute out of it, Tsunade can probably just tank the damage, Katsuyu might be able to split apart to avoid being consumed completely by the flames, one of the toads may be able to block the jutsu with either their sword or shield, and Jiraiya might be able to block it with some sort of earth style, or maybe even outright dodge it if he's already in Sage mode. One funny outcome I can imagine, though, is that Itachi actually hits Tsunade with the Amaterasu, and then she punches Itachi while she's still covered in the black flames, spreading the flames of Amaterasu onto Itachi and making him die to his own jutsu. Of course, this isn't a certainty, and in fact it's probably unlikely, but I do think the idea is pretty entertaining. But anyway, the end result of Itachi using the Amaterasu would be a bit of relieved pressure at the cost of a lot of his stamina. If Itachi uses the Tsukiyomi, he'll be in a lot of trouble because he's only hitting one target at a time with it, and honestly, we don't know if this would even work on the summons at all, but even so, I don't think Itachi would use it on the summons. In particular, if he hits Jiraiya with the Tsukiyomi, I think it might be possible that Jiraiya could more or less just resist the effects of Tsukiyomi because of his indomitable spirit or whatever, but I don't want to claim that as a certainty by any means. I do think it's worth highlighting this as a possibility, so the best case for Itachi here is that he gets rid of like one opponent through the use of the Tsukiyomi. In the meantime, the Sanin will have to contest with the Susano, and this won't be easy for them. They'll be in danger of being one-shot by the Totsuka blade at pretty much all times and can't easily break through the Susano's armor. Given the amount of help they have and their sheer physical firepower at their disposal though, I do think it's likely that the Sanin could break through the Susano in a reasonable amount of time. Let's not forget that Tsunade herself was able to punch a hole straight through the perfect Susano, and so a lesser version of the same jutsu should be fair game for her to get through as well. This brings us into the later stages of the fight, and it's here that the Sanin have a supreme advantage if they're all still alive at this point. Under the assumption that they haven't all been sealed away by the Totsuka blade or whatever else Itachi has decided to use, then it will be whoever is left of the Sanin versus a very exhausted Itachi. And unfortunately for Itachi, I think there's pretty much nothing he can do to come away with a victory if the fight progresses to this stage. If Itachi is out of his Susano, then he's almost definitely exhausted all of his chakra to the point of no longer being able to use his other Mangekyo techniques, and without his heavy hitters, I just don't think Itachi really has the firepower to put the Sanin down. In the end, this fight comes down to the fact that the Sanin can put a lot of pressure on Itachi and force him to use up his very limited stamina. Itachi certainly could pull a win here if he manages to just annihilate his opponents with the Totsuka blade or something like that, but I honestly can't see a situation in which this goes that smoothly for Itachi. If Jiraiya gets into Sage mode, then Itachi loses to the Frog Song, and most other scenarios I can imagine end up with the Sanin losing one or two members on their path to a dangerous victory. Maybe if the Sanin didn't have some of the most legendary teamwork of the entire verse, or have some of the only abilities that actually allow them to resist Itachi's crazy hacks powers, then the outcome of this fight might swing the other direction. In the end, though, I think this battle plays out much the same way as the Sanin versus Pain does. Itachi certainly could come out on top, but it would be by far the hardest fight of his life, and more likely than not, the Sanin would take this victory with a very hard but manageable fight on their hands. And that's pretty much all I've got to say about Itachi versus the Sanin. I really hope you all enjoyed this video. It certainly was a good time to puzzle and ponder this over the past couple of weeks. Like I said, Itachi's arsenal is probably better for combating the Sanin than Pain's is. The problem with it is that the Sanin are simply able to counter him more efficiently than they could with Pain and last long enough to run Itachi's stamina out. If you have any more thoughts on the subject, though, I would love to hear them down in the comments below. Go ahead and drop a comment if you feel inclined, and we can continue the discussion there. But that's going to be all from me today. I hope to see you all in the next video, and until then, y'all stay safe, have a good rest of your day, and goodbye.